My friends, I think it will be a surprise to no one that Russians love to drink. Since the times of the Tsars, alcohol has been an inseparable part of the Russian culture and lifestyle. But what happens when Russians travel abroad? For example, to Central Africa? No worries. The Russian Federation cares deeply for its citizens and their need for that sweet, sweet nectar of the gods.
Хлеб, молоко, соль, водка.
Introducing Wagner's own alcohol brand, Africa Tilor, or for the people who like their beer with a side of atrocities. That's right, Wagner has its own beer. So sit back and crack open a can of hopefully war crimes free refreshment and let me tell you more. We have all heard about Wagner's exploits in Ukraine, the Battle of Bakhmut and the mutiny that followed. However, for the Russian state, their most invaluable contribution is the actions in Africa. Ever since the time of the Soviet Union, Russia has had good connections with many African countries, especially when it comes to the military assistance. However, since Wagner established itself on the continent in 2017, the Russian influence has been on the sharp rise. First deployed to Libya, Sudan and South Sudan, the Wagner is especially comfortable in supporting African governments in civil wars. They have been employed by many governments of the Sahel region, which is increasingly unstable. As the Islamist insurgencies flared up, the peacekeepers and the Western powers were often unable to combat them effectively. Those countries then experienced coups by their own military forces, and their new leaders found Wagner to be a very useful tool. While peacekeepers in countries like Mali and Central African Republic would try to keep civilians on their side and rarely took sides in local conflicts, Wagner had no such limits. It directly served the regime and only the regime. Government has a problem with opposition politicians, Wagner will shoot them. Government forces come under fire while entering a village, Wagner will round up and execute all men in that village. Local mines need to expand and some local huts are on the way. No problem, those houses look very flammable indeed. So, this all guaranteed the success of Wagner and led to the exodus of Western forces from many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And with all that came the Russian economic and cultural influence as well. I mean, who would want Russian cultural influence? It's one of the most horrible things I've heard. Even after the Wagner rebellion, there was little actual change to Russian activities in Africa. Their structures were seemingly all just absorbed into the Russian Ministry of Defense and adopted into New Africa Corps. Those activities fell into an especially fertile soil in the Central African Republic. Since 2012, the country has been in an especially brutal and complicated civil war. The involvement of French and United Nations troops did not prove a solid security guarantee for the country's political elite, so when France started to pull out its troops in 2016, the Russian government saw it as an opportunity. Russian military instructors arrived in the country in 2017 and by 2018, Wagner had a sure foothold in the area. In May of 2018, there were more than 1,000 Russian mercenaries in the country. Russians with Sudan helped to broker deals between rebels and the government, but were unable to stop the fighting. As the rebels mounted an offensive during the end of 2020, the support of Wagner was able to turn the tide in favor of the government, saving the capital for the rebel offensive. Because of that, the influence of France disappeared almost entirely and it broke its links to the Central African government. Since then, Wagner has been the main foreign force in the country. It is the primary force taking villages and mines from the rebels. Wagner has even trained its own forces composed of locals like the Wagner Die Azande and so-called Black Russians, with some of them now fighting for Russia in Ukraine. With all this, the president, Faustin Archange Touadera, is basically a hostage to the Russians, as even his bodyguards are Russian soldiers. When Wagner was achieving victories against the rebel forces on the battlefield, it also little by little took control over the economic sectors of the Central African Republic. First came the mines, which Wagner took over from the rebels. Then they moved into taking the forestry business over from the loggers who had been cutting down Central Africa's huge rainforests. And now they're moving into new sectors, establishing radio stations, breweries, logistics companies, and everything in between. Still, the biggest business for them in Central Africa is the gold and diamond mines. It is thought that those mines have already generated billions for Wagner and Russia. Wagner's blueprint for taking control over the gold mine and diamond mines is very simple. As the conflict reached those mines, the contracts of Western companies working there were suspended. Wagner soldiers then took control of the mine, and Wagner mining companies like Midas Resources or Diamville were granted a new contract. However, these mines have a community of independent miners working in and around them. What happened to them? Well, there's no sugarcoating it. They get killed. This is a quote from one of the miners. On a Sunday morning, Russian paramilitaries arrived by helicopter near the mine in Koki, where miners mostly live, and started shooting at people. They killed 12 civilians, some of whom were artisanal miners. It's over from the law. Wagner shows up in those villages, kills the miners, rapes the women, and burns the villages to the ground to force everyone else to leave the area. But I can hear you already asking, where does the beer come in? As Wagner has taken control of the Central African Republic, they have been diversifying their revenue sources. As such, Wagner opened its own brewery in Bangui at the end of 2021, launching their beer brand Africa di Lor to the market. Riders on motorcycles distributed the beers to stores and bars, forcing them to accept it, and ads were everywhere from street corners to Facebook and Instagram. Behind this successful new product was the First Industrial Company, a firm owned by Dmitry Siti, Russia's cultural attaché in the Central African Republic and a frontman for Wagner businesses in the country. This guy truly is something special. From working in a Russian troll factory to owning gold mines and newspapers in Central Africa in just a couple of years. As the head of the Russian house in the Central African Republic, it seems that he has found some enemies. In December of 2022, he got one of the worst Christmas presents when the letter he was opening exploded in his hands, leaving him short of some fingers. This, however, didn't stop the plans of Wagner to quench the thirst of Central Africans. Only there was a small problem with that. Wagner had competition. For over 70 years, Mocaf, beer brand belonging to the French drinks giant Castel, maintained a brewery in Bangui, the capital of Central African Republic. So, Russians embarked on a campaign to destroy the Mocaf's reputation, claiming in social media that it had supported the rebels. Wagner said that drinking Mocaf beer is the same as supporting terrorism. Irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife, especially after March of 2023, when Wagner went a step further. On March 5th, a group of men in military uniforms carrying Kalashnikovs approached the brewery. They threw around 30 petrol bombs into the facility, setting fire to its storage yard. Russian beverages have had a lot of success. By now they have a wide selection of drinks to choose from. Maybe you would like a soft drink but don't want any of your money to go to those Americans with their Coca-Cola? Well, in that case, let me show you the African Fanta and Tilor Cola. You want water? Great! Here's the new product, Crystal Mineral Water. For those who prefer alcohol, we have the Wanana Vodka, both in bottles and in plastic bags. You know, the Russian way. Their troops go to war, they come back in plastic bags. They also serve vodka in plastic bags. And a new assortment of liquors as well. And of course, the events. The Dilor Beer sponsors football games, boxing matches, concerts, and even beauty pageants. It seems that City really has done a good job. After the death of Prigozhin, the president of Central Africa personally sent a delegation to Moscow to assure that he will not lose his position as the middleman between Central African Republic and Russia. Wagner's entry into the beverage industry is not just about diversifying revenue. It's also a strategic exercise in soft power. Alcohol, media, and sports sponsorships form part of a broader effort to infiltrate daily life in Central Africa and shape the way they think about Russia. Beer cans, movies, and sponsored football matches are all subtle, persistent reminders who is now in charge. By replacing the French beer with Africa de l'Or and sponsoring community events, Wagner effectively rebrands Russian influence as normal and even desirable. The strategy is simple. Flood the market with your own product, slap your logos on everything from beer bottles to boxing rings, and suddenly Russia isn't some faraway power broker, it's part of daily life. Ooh, what a horrible thought. Want to relax after work? Crack open a bottle of Delord. Going to the big football game, sponsored by the guys who just secured your village. Listening to the radio, that song break is brought to you by the same people who control your country's gold mines. When a football team wins wearing Delord jerseys or a family drinks Russian-made cola during a celebration, the psychological shift is complete. Russia is no longer a foreign intruder, but a familiar presence. This manipulation of symbols and habits is how empires are built in the 21st century, not just with bullets, but with branding. It's true that Wagner and Russia have made a lot of money from the ventures in Central Africa, but in the end, this is not about money at all. This is about control. Russia is a country imagining itself to be an empire, and for any empire stuck in the 19th century, colonies in Africa are a must-have. Many Western countries, especially France, have maintained their foothold in Central Africa since colonial times. Because of that, it was easy for Russia and China to gather support. They just needed to say, look, they are colonizers and we are here just to liberate you. It is important to note that for many Africans, there is little difference between Russia and French control. While Western companies do not do their killing themselves, they still often pay protection money to different rebel organizations. So even if the Russian mercenaries violently take control over these businesses, there really is no incentive for locals to support Western countries that have exploited these places since they were colonies. But of course, what Russia has been doing in Central Africa is far more destructive than anything the West is doing there. While a lot of Western influence is a consequence of the colonial times, Russia is actively trying to bring those times back. We can see from recent attacks against Wagner that their goodwill with the African people is diminishing with every atrocity they commit. Russia built up its influence in Africa by offering them something the Western countries were unwilling to offer and by exploiting the distrust of Africans towards Europeans. What was at first a military operation has now become a Russian colonial project with political, economic, and cultural dimensions. This is the reason why Wagner would start its own beer brand in the Central African Republic. It's not only to make money, but also to tie the country into the Russian cultural and economic sphere, all while severing last connections that the country has to Western Europe. But not everything is decided yet. Russian actions in Africa have won them a lot of enemies, and even their allies have been forced to complete dependency. If Russia isn't capable of continuing their support, they will soon discover that their new empire in Africa will have a very short lifespan. This is exactly what happened in Syria, when Russia was unable to support Assad due to the war in Ukraine. If you're still here, my friends, now you know why Wagner has its own beer company in the Central African Republic. Thank you for watching and thank you for coming back time and time again. These videos are in-depth analysis. They're written by experts who research into these topics. They take a lot of time and effort to make. So they are especially for you as channel members. If you're not a channel member yet, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. It's only $1 per month and you will get extra videos with early access every Saturday. Join up, my friends, support the channel and enjoy the content. As always, until my next video, Slava Ukraini and bye-bye.